If you like guitars and custom guitar building, then stay tuned because we are about to dive into episode 5 of my custom Les Paul build. Let's go! Got loads done in the last 4 episodes, and if you haven't watched those 4 episodes, they're on screen now, and you can go back if you click the channel name and have a look through those. There's lots of little tips and tricks in there for anybody who's new to the world of guitar building to follow along and do their own and figure out how to do things like make custom neck plans and put cavities into bodies and all sorts of good stuff like that. In this episode, we're picking up where we left off with the neck. And there's lots to do, and there's probably going to be at least one more episode on the neck even after this one, but we'll get as much done today as we can. Before we dive back into building this guitar, I'm going to do my undignified begging now and get it out of the way. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I had set myself a goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That's really not going to happen because I haven't even hit 500 yet. So if I get 500 subscribers by the end of the year, I'll be really happy, but your help can make all the difference. I don't put out a lot of videos, maybe one every month, one every 6 weeks. So I'm not going to be spamming you. So hopefully if you can just click that subscribe button, maybe hit the like button, maybe even comment, it will make all the difference in getting this channel out to people and making it something viable that I really want to continue doing. Okay, enough said, let's get building. One of the things I'm being really transparent on in this channel is that I'm very, very new to guitar building. I've only made one, this is my second, and I'm taking on a lot of things here I haven't done before. So there will be some mistakes. And I seem to have made one in the last video, and thankfully a bunch of people in the comments came to my rescue. E.R. Barrett, Barry Christian and Neil Jelks over at NSJ Guitars. Everybody was really helpful and gave me a lot of guidance. So the mistake was when I made this fingerboard, I put a little shelf at the front of it, and I'll put a close-up on screen now. And that shelf was to take the locking nut, and I had done some calculations to get the depth of that shelf right, or so I thought anyway. And it turns out I'm 0.7 of a millimeter out. So I need to drop this shelf 0.7 of a millimeters. And that's the first thing we're going to do today. All right, off camera, we've moved the guitar away and we've taken a piece of flat plywood, and we're going to use this as our registration for taking that nut shelf down 0.7 of a millimeters. Now, the biggest challenge is how the hell do you take something down 0.7 of a millimeter, because this is not a precision tool for doing that. You can adjust the depth of this, but it becomes quite difficult to get it accurate. Well, we're going to use technology and we're going to use 3D printing. Dave from Footstep Guitars has been laughing at me saying that my channel seems like a cookery channel, and he's probably right, because here's one I've prepared earlier. And this is just a little bridge that I've made, which is about the width of the fingerboard, and it can sit over like that on the piece of plywood, and we can use that as a router guide to follow the nut. The challenge, of course, is how do we get that down 0.7 of a millimeters? Well, it's really easy. We use 3D printing again, and we make a little 0.7 millimeter shim, and we're going to put that on top, set the height, take that away, and then that'll drop it down 0.7 of a millimeters. And that should get us exactly what we need to do here in terms of the cut. So before we go any further, I'm going to get all of this set up and we'll get it positioned correctly on the camera. We're a little better set up now. I've changed into a t-shirt that I don't mind getting dirty. I've taped the fingerboard to this piece of plywood. And I've put some double-sided tape along the front of that shelf as well. Now, the next thing I need to do, of course, is register this jig that I've made with the fingerboard so that it routes perfectly straight. And we're going to use 2 small squares to do that. These are from Bridge City Tools. They are just wonderfully made. But all we do is we'll just put them in like that. And we know that's square now. And we'll do the same on the other side. And the further apart we can get them, the better. Because if they're too close, they'll pivot a little bit. And if they're a bit further apart, they'll work quite well. And now we just take this shelf that we made before, and we're going to line that up with these. So very straightforward. Just coming down and putting that in place. Now I want to say that's okay, but I'm just going to check it off camera just to be 100% sure because I don't trust myself. Let's see how it works. It's pretty good. I have a tiny concern on the right hand side here because it's offside a bit, but I knew that was the case when I was making this neck anyway, because I'm ever so slightly deviated on the right, but the middle part which we're cutting out is straight and true. So we should be okay to route. So the next thing we need to do now is set the depth. So I'm just going to pop this little shim on top. I'm going to grab my router and plop it down. And there we go. And now I'm just going to set this so that its depth is down the right way. And we're just very closely kissing the top of the fingerboard as we move it about. So still quite smooth. Still quite smooth. Okay, now we have some abrasion. So we're going to lock that up. Take the shim out of the way. And yeah, we're about 0.7 off the top. So the good news is we're ready to route. Now I'm just going to take this out of the way for a second. I'm going to press everything down to make sure we don't have any lateral movement while we're routing, which we don't. And we will just get some PPE. I'm going to get some eye protection and some mouth protection, and we'll start routing this. I think that went well, but let's take everything off and have a look. Just going to take a small straight edge and just double check everything. Okay, that went great. One more job out of the way and a step closer. So that's mistakes from the last episode fixed, which I'm glad to get across the line. The next thing we need to do now is start deciding where we're going to put some shape into the neck. So for that, we're going to bring the guitar back on the bench. We're going to unbolt the neck, take out the truss rod for a little bit and start working specifically on that. It always feels strange separating the body from the neck again, especially after making so much progress. However, these are things we need to do. One of the things I want to do right now is establish where the nut is going to finish here. So that's going to be very straightforward. We're just going to pop the locking nut on and just draw in white pencil where it's going to finish. Now that we have this line in place and we know where the nut is going to stop, if you can imagine it, we're going to lower the front of this down here by about 6 millimeters, give or take. And it's not going to be just 6 millimeters on a right angle up, because that's awful and ugly and who wants that on their guitar. It's going to be 6 millimeters and curving up into the fingerboard, especially now where we know where to stop. To do this, we're going to need to cut away some of the top of this fingerboard, because if we tried to sand it, we would be here for hours and the results would be not particularly consistent if we got it wrong. So we're going to cut some of this off with the bandsaw and then we'll sand it up to the final depth. So bear with me off camera while I get everything set up and we get this underway. That went well. It might be a bit difficult to see it on camera, but there is a little step up here. I'll put a close up on screen as always. Now we're going to use the spindle sander to get this nice and smooth and tapered up into the fingerboard. And of course the question is, how do we do that? Because this has no frame of reference. It's just a spinning disc of sandpaper. Well, like every other guitar builder out there, I've made a fence. And this fence will get clamped down here. And then when we push the material in, it can only go as thick as the distance between the spindle and the fence. So to do this, we're going to start off nice and wide, and then we're going to creep up bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit, until we're where we want to be. I'm going to set this up now, and then we'll just get into it and get it done. But before we do anything, we need to make sure this is square. So we're going to take a machinist square like we always do, pop it up to the spindle, and yep, that's square. And we'll just offer it up to the fence, and we have no light coming through there. So we know we're square on both fronts, which means the guitar neck has to stand square too. So we're off to a good start. Hopefully it'll stay that way. I got really carried away and I forgot to record probably 90% of that, but I think you got the idea with the fence and the spindle. It was just a case of sand it, bring the fence a millimeter forward, sand it, bring the fence a millimeter forward, and ultimately you end up with this. I'll put a close up on screen as always, but it's turned out pretty good. There's a fairly consistent flat surface and a nice curve up into the fingerboard. And I have left a tiny little overhang on the fingerboard deliberately because the next job, as we mentioned before, is to put this veneer on the headstock. Now, why am I doing this now? Because I have a flat surface here to clamp against. I'm not going to have that later as soon as I start coming into this area and sanding this down and putting in the neck volute. So this is the time to get it done. Doing this is pretty much a rinse and repeat of the first guitar. Now with the first guitar, my rosewood veneer was a bit thicker and it wouldn't really conform to the curves. So I soaked it in water and I 3D printed out these two cauls, clamped it between them, left it for 3 or 4 days and came back and it was pretty much in the curved shape. And then all I needed to do was take this, put it up against the headstock and clamp it into place. Now, thankfully, this is the same radius, and the reason for that is because it's the same radius as the spindle we were using to sand. It's about 40 millimeters on the outside radius. So really easy when you have consistency across the little forms you're using to make everything go together. So I'm going to cut the veneer to size, put it on with some original Type Bond, clamp it up with the form and leave it in place overnight. And then we come back tomorrow and we should be able to trim around the edges quite nicely indeed. This is going to be a bit messy. It's going to take a while, so I'm just going to do a little time lapse and you guys can watch what's going on. That's it. There's really nothing we can do now other than wait until tomorrow and hope it all went according to plan. It's always challenging with the veneer to understand if you got it right or not. There does appear to be some squeeze out around the edges, which is great. But yeah, let's go to sleep, come back tomorrow, see what it looks like. And hopefully we'll just be able to trim off the veneer and we should have a beautiful looking headstock to match that fantastic looking body. See you in the morning. Well, it's the next day, so let's get these unclamped and see if this worked out or if it's a complete mess. Hopefully it worked out, but we'll see. Okay, I'm going to quietly call that successful. I do need to trim all of this right now and get it onto the guitar. But so far looking pretty good. So this is a piece of 180 sandpaper on a block. It's always important to put these on blocks so that you're not just sanding arbitrarily based on whatever shape your fingers are at that moment in time. And with veneer, what you don't want, because the veneer is here, you don't want to sand this way because you'll break it. You want to sand against it, against the hardwood, and that should give you a clean cut. Okay, and already I can feel that's perfect. And if I look at it from the front, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, we're just going to keep doing that the whole way around, and I'll come back to you in a minute. Well, that's done, and that was, I'm going to be honest, pretty stressful because this is such a brittle veneer, being only 0.7 millimeters thick, but we've managed to get a few things done. The veneer is now on the headstock, so we don't see the laminations on the back anymore. And I've put back in the tuner holes, sculpted it all around here, and I've put in the truss rod relief as well. Where it meets the fingerboard couldn't be any better. I'm really happy with that. And the secret there was just to take away a tiny bit, measure, and keep going until I was happy with it. So everything here on the front now is pretty much done in terms of the gluing and trimming, which is lovely. We do need to glue the fingerboard on, but that's going to come in a little bit. The thing I want to do now is I want to do what we did on the front. I want to take some of the back of the headstock away. And when we were drilling down through the back of the headstock to put in these tuner holes, normally you put a piece of wood underneath to stop any blowout or any ripping of the wood. Because I knew I was taking away the back of the headstock, that doesn't matter. So all this blowout here, we're just going to be able to cut off on the bandsaw. The reason I want to do it now is, again, because I have this flat side here. So while I have that to reference against, I can cut this clean, accurate and true. I might not be able to do that later if I had put a carve into the neck. Something I need to determine is where my first fret is going to be, which I have here. And then I want to transfer about 3/4 of the way into the first fret here so that I can work out where my volute is going to be. So I'm going to just draw that in. I know my headstock is going to be 14 millimeters thick as well. So I'm just going to draw a 14 millimeter line here so I know where I'm cutting. And once I've all that drawn in, I'll give you a quick little close-up of that. And we'll go over to the bandsaw then and start cutting just like we did the last time. Take out the spindle sander just like we did the last time and just get that nice and transition for the time being. Okay, so off camera, like I was saying, I've drawn in my 14 millimeters here in terms of the headstock material I want to keep. But now I need to figure out how to turn that or carve it into a volute to join the rest of the neck that's down the side here. Now to do that, I need a couple of points. The first one is this line here. I put in one of the tuners temporarily just to see where it goes, and I gave myself probably another 0.5 centimeter after that. So here is roughly where I want to be coming in terms of the cut. And honestly, I think where I'm going to be cutting is really to this line here, just this natural point on the headstock. The volute I've drawn in is pretty much an arbitrary line. I've just taken this curve and flipped it around 180 and taken this curve and flipped it around 180 and joined them in the middle. That's a comfortable shape for me. There's no signs to it. I've just kind of looked at the ones I have on other instruments and found what I like and made my own version of it. This most extreme point here to the right, I've transferred here to the neck on the side. And the reason for that is then that I can connect this 14 millimeter line here down into a curve and get the idea of where I want to go. Now, the neck is not going to have that thick of a volute. We'll probably stop somewhere here because it's quite a thick neck blanket, 35 millimeters. And when we come up to the fingerboard here, we're going to be thinning that out to about 21 millimeters. So a 15 mil or 1.5 centimeter drop is massive. It will look ridiculous. So we'll take some of that back. This line here is the nut, and this line here is the first fret. So ideally what we want is when we're coming back up with the volute, we want to be coming into sort of that first third area here of the fingerboard, so that we can have a comfortable grip. So coming from here down, back up into the neck. So the next job is we're just going to go over to the bandsaw and we're going to cut away this material here. And as I said, probably just stop at this line to make it look somewhat sensible and figure out where we're going from there. So you've already seen me cutting on a bandsaw. I'm not going to make you sit through the second time, but we have cut out that part of the headstock. So that's looking good now. It's very rough on the back, but that's what the sander is for. We're going to fix it there. And then we need to figure out this transition up, as I said, into the volute itself. Now, there's quite a bit of work involved in that. And all I want to do for now is just start to get that curve in, because I can carve the rest in later. But this hard edge here just at the moment looks terrible and we need to fix that. So we're going to do that next. This didn't turn out bad. I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how well it turned out. So as we know, the front is veneered with the flamed maple that meets the fingerboard, I think, pretty perfectly. And now the back is flattened as well, and we have the start of a volute. It's not the finished product because we'll be doing more carving later, but this just lets us get an idea of where we want those angles to flow, and it gets this part flattened out quite nicely indeed. So the next job is a fun one. Probably one of the more stressful ones, like anything involving glue. We're going to glue the fingerboard onto the neck. And then we'll trim it later, but we're going to glue it on for now. Now, with gluing anything, my advice is grab all your clamps, figure out where they're going to go before you do it, because there's nothing worse than starting to glue something up and then having a panic attack thinking, oh my God, I need another 5 clamps, or I need to move clamps around. So do a dry run with the clamps, then come back and clamp it on. And that's what we're going to do right now. This is kind of what the dry run looks like. I've got most of my critical areas figured out in terms of where I want to put clamps and where I want to put pressure. There are some changes I need to make, but I know what I'm doing now. So this clamp here, for example, I'm going to put at the end to put pressure on, and I'll put 2 of these horizontal clamps here and here instead. So I'm going to take a picture of this, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do some prep for the glue, which I'll show you in 2 seconds. That's really important. And then it's just getting it done as quick as we can before the glue starts to get a little bit tacky and crappy. So give me 2 seconds, we'll get all this off again and we'll get prepped. One of the things that's really important is, because we've been working with this wood to such a fine degree, putting it through things like the drum sander and the planers, it's particularly smooth, which means it's not going to want to take a strong level of grip from the adhesive. So we're just going to take some 120 paper, give this the lightest hand sanding you've ever seen, and the same on the back of the fingerboard, and that will just get us to a point where there's a key on both wood surfaces for the glue to work its way in and out of the grain of the wood and give us a better bond. So it's only going to take 2 seconds, and we might as well do it now. Now we've just made a big pile of dust, so we need to tidy all that up. Let's grab this guy. Okay. Now we need to start preparing where we want the glue to go and where we don't want the glue to go. We really don't want the glue to go down into the truss rod cavity and start blocking the mechanism for the truss rod itself. And I don't really want it to go on this maple up here in the front either. So I'm going to pop the fingerboard on just for a second to give us the registration of where the maple is out the front. There we go. And it's always good to have things that are fit for purpose. This is 10mm tape, which is really good for this type of job because you can get right up close and you can conform around corners as well. So I'm really happy with that. And I'm just going to put a little bit more here as well. I will use a new piece actually because that's not long enough. And the advantage of doing this as well is that we are closing the truss rod cavity from anything that can get in there in terms of adhesives as well. So nice, simple little job, easy to do. And we have a nice tight line where the fingerboard is meeting the maple. Now the next thing we need to do, of course, is cover the truss rod itself because we're going to lay down adhesive and we really don't want that adhesive to come out anywhere it shouldn't. So for the purposes of just making sure that we don't mess up any more than we need to, we'll put down 2 strips. Okay, that looks great. Next thing I want to do, and I know I'm being completely over the top here, but I want to tape around the side of the fingerboard as well because that's where the squeeze out is going to be. Now, some people say you should clamp everything upside down. You can, it's just a little bit more faffy. A bit of tape fixes this in 2 minutes. Now, the trick when you're putting down tape is to make it as long as possible, pull it taut, and it's as easy as that. Now, just run your finger along the top like this in case there's anything sticking out tape-wise, and you can just burnish it down. There's not going to be much, but you can just burnish it down anyway. And to be honest, when you put the fingerboard on it, it's going to just push it down regardless. Right, there is no point in waiting any longer. I have procrastinated as much as is humanly possible. I've done all the prep I can do. If it goes right, it goes right. If it goes slightly wrong, it goes slightly wrong. I don't think it will. But let's get gluing and let's get clamping. What I'm looking to do here is get as much coverage on the middle as I can so that it soaks into the fibers of the various parts of wood. But also I want to try and make sure I have enough at the edges to close the edges properly and give us some proper squeeze out. So for the sake of a tiny bit of glue that costs us nothing really, only time, why not? One little thing, just I guess to talk about the truss rod while we're here looking at it. A lot of people tend to put acrylic down into the truss rod cavity just to stop it from rattling. And now if you get your cavity right, you really shouldn't have any rattles at all. But what a lot of people do is squeeze in a little bit of acrylic through like a sealant gun or something like that. And that works, but you always run the risk of that staining and coming out later. And that's not something you want because if you've spent ages finishing your guitar, the last thing you need is some big black dirty stain coming out on your neck. So what I do is I take a tiny bit of rubber and I had plenty of it from using that rubber block to clean my spindle sander. And I just take the lightest little wisps of those and just tuck them in under the truss rod. And that keeps the truss rod properly positioned, but also free from any knocks or rattles or anything like that. All right, I really think that's it. So before we do the next step, we need to take off the masking tape where the truss rod is. Very straightforward. Just catch the edge of it with a Stanley knife and lift it up. Come out. And there we go. I'm just going to stick that over here to one side for the moment. And then I'm going to get all the glue off my fingers because I'm remarkably good at gluing myself together. I'm really excited about this because this is the last time we're putting the neck on with those little dowels. And it's just quite an exciting moment, really, if we can get it to fit. Okay, there it is located, and already I can start to see some squeeze out at the edge, which is such a good sign. It means all our wood machining went according to plan, really. So here comes the fun part, clamping. All right, let's get the glue out of the way. And I've managed to glue my fingers again. There is a possibility we may mar the top of the fingerboard a little, and it really doesn't matter because we will be later on giving that a final radius sand like we had planned before. Okay, so already we're in a good place. Okay, and the back of the neck doesn't matter if it gets marred either because we're going to be carving that. Oh, there's great squeeze out. Okay, that's really good. That's looking really good. Okay, I'm actually starting to get even more excited now. I'm going to clamp up the very end here like this. There we go. And I'm just going to try and rearrange two of these clamps a tiny bit to give me a little bit more room. There we go. That's perfect. So that was a busy day. Got the headstock veneered, which is lovely. We have that all neat and tidy. We've our screw holes back in for the tuners. We have the front curved up to meet the fretboard and the veneer perfectly lined with where it meets the fingerboard. And we've managed to cut into the back and level that out, which is great too. So the headstock is in a really good place. The neck is, after really transforming in just a few minutes, the truss rod is in, the fingerboard is clamped on, gluing, drying. So we're going to come back tomorrow, take it all out of clamps and see how we're looking. So yeah, catch you tomorrow. All right, there's a fingerboard connected to a neck, and yeah, there's a couple of little light marks from the rubber, but we're going to be sanding that back anyway, so that's really easy to fix. I'm just going to take off the masking tape now and yeah, take a proper look at it. Okay, apart from all the mess on the desk, we have an assembled neck with the truss rod in, which looks great. Where the squeeze out has sort of forced the masking tape to stay where it is for the time being, but we're going to trim the fingerboard down now because the fingerboard on the front is quite wide, and as you can see on the back as well, if I bring it a bit closer, hopefully that'll focus, you can see there's quite a little bit of relief we have to do on the left and right. But when we get that trimmed up and we get it on the router table, or maybe the hand router, I haven't decided which yet, we'll be able to trim the fingerboard to match perfectly. So that's going to be the next job. Well, that's the fingerboard trimmed now on the bandsaw, as you saw, and I used the hand plane just to try and get this as close to the body as I could comfortably, because we're going to transition over to the router now to make sure we trim everything up perfectly. In terms of the router, I'm going to route the sides and I'm going to come a little bit short of the end because the fingerboard here at the end overhangs and the 24th fret is right at the edge, so I don't want to curve that around. I want this to overhang a little bit because that's just nicer looking on the body when the fingerboard extends a little bit over the body itself. So let's get set up and let's get routing. So yeah, it's really starting to take shape now, but we just need to sand this last part in, which I am going to do by hand. And always, if you're sanding with a straight line, guys, make sure you use a block. If you're not using a block, you're not going to get a straight line. So I'm just going to start out by removing some of the heavy stock with some 60 grit and work my way up through the grits. And yeah, we'll be back in 2 seconds to talk about wrapping this episode up. Well, you know, every episode, this starts to take shape more and more. And I really think it's starting to look like an instrument that I'm going to be playing pretty soon. It certainly feels like it. And I'm getting an idea of how it's going to be to hold and play and what the finished instrument is actually going to look like visually too. I still have lots to plan there though. In the next episode, if you come back, we are going to carve this neck. We're going to put in that lovely round profile. And I tend to go for flat modern necks. And I guess that balances the 14-inch fingerboard radius I have. We'll do a transition up into the body. We'll do a transition into the volute and we'll properly carve the volute on both sides. And then on the front side, what we need to do is fit that nut that we were measuring up for earlier. And yeah, we might even get some frets pressed in. And that's really exciting because when the frets go on, then it really starts to look like a guitar. So yeah, come back for the next episode. I'd love to have you join me again. And if you could share this video with your friends or put it up on Facebook or Instagram, that would be even better. See you in the next one.